Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well and coping during these tough times. Just thought I'd share my 2 cents regarding the iPad Air 2020 upcoming release. Just give you some updates about the release itself, some potential specs, a comparison with the current iPad Pro and the current iPad Air models, a comparison with the future iPad Pro and whether you should buy now or wait, depending on your circumstances. So the topics that I'll be discussing will be in the timestamps in the description below, so feel free to jump forward if you'd like. And without further ado, let's get started. So with the iPad Air 2020 model, so the 4th gen, we're expecting a release sometime in September, and that being week 37. So the 7th week commencing on the 7th of September onwards. And a lot of sources have said that that's what it will be leaning towards. So looking forward to that happening in very, very soon, so within a week or two. I think it's a good idea to sort of wait out and see what the news is regarding that if you are contemplating between an iPad Air and also actually even an iPad Pro, and the reason why I'll get to in a bit. Just taking a quick look at the actual iPad Air current generation, so the 3rd gen model, you can see that it has a 10.5 inch display, 264 pixels per inch, P3 display, True Tone, fully laminated, and these features, these tech specs are very similar to the 10.5 inch iPad Pro released in 2017. So if we just scroll down to the very bottom to the tech specs, and just excuse me, then we can see that it has a very similar display. In terms of its internals, it does have an A10X Fusion chip compared to the iPad Air, which obviously was released a few years later, so it was released with a more updated A12. So in how the current iPad Air 3rd gen model sort of took the outer body, the outer casing of the iPad Pro, we should be expecting the next version of the iPad Air, so the 2020 version or 4th gen iPad Air, to take the 1st generation of the iPad Pro, so the outer sort of, I guess, aesthetic, that aesthetic profile. In terms of its internals, we should probably see a very similar sort of picture being displayed, potentially increasing the brightness from 500 to 600 nits, hopefully, and then maybe looking into a similar A12X chip or better. And I think some of the differences compared to the current iPad Pro is that it probably would not have a quad array of speakers, would probably not feature ProMotion technology as the name suggests. What else would there be? Obviously it would not feature a LiDAR scanner and probably not as comprehensive an array of cameras. And so I guess that would sort of be the distinguishing factors between the current iPad Air, the upcoming iPad Air, and the current iPad Pro. But really, you're looking at between the 1st and the 2nd generations of iPad Pros when taking that into consideration. So, and given that the price point will actually be a few $100s cheaper, I think it is actually quite worth a look into the new upcoming release of the iPad Air and see how it will fare in terms of performance. And I guess it's similar in display to the iPad Pro 11 inch. In terms of the future iPad Pro, you might be thinking that, wow, the upcoming iPad Air seems to be more and more like the iPad Pro that's currently in existence, and you are actually quite right. The fact that it only is lacking a few speakers, lacking ProMotion display, potentially not having as great of a processing power, but for most people, the average person would not really require those sorts of things. So you might be thinking, is it really worth it? And so I think I would heavily suggest you to lean towards the iPad Air if you don't really need the Pro capabilities. But then one might be thinking, how can you start, I guess, comparing between the new iPad Air and the upcoming iPad Pro, potentially releasing in 2021? And I think the Apple company would have to come out with something even better to have that distinguishing factor to entice people to want to buy the new iPad Pro. So those are just my 2 cents. I feel like given the big jump from the previous iPad Air to this iPad Air, so essentially going from a 10.5 inch iPad Pro into an 11-inch iPad Pro, just rebranded as an iPad Air 2020 edition, we should be looking forward to seeing an even better iPad Pro in its next release. And so coming down to whether or not you should buy an iPad, if you really do need an iPad and you really do need the best, I think the iPad Pro will still be a good purchase for you, at least for the next year and a half, for the next year, due to the fact that the iPad Pro is released in 18-month installments. And so you would typically see the next iPad Pro iteration coming out in September of next year. And even so, I don't expect it to be that big of an update or that big of a jump in terms of specs. So if you buy the iPad Pro, you should be all right if you really do need it. If you don't necessarily need the Pro capabilities as much, and are actually looking at the iPad Air currently, so the 3rd gen, I'm sure you'd be more than happy with their 4th gen that will be released, most likely having that similar design aesthetic and having similar internals, if not a little bit better, to match the current sort of performance of current iPads. If you are leaning towards the iPad Air, then most definitely wait. You should be having a very, very good surprise around the corner. And those are just my 2 cents for you. Hope you enjoy. If you'd like any sort of other comparisons or any sort of insight into what else is going on, please do comment down below. I really don't care if you'd subscribe or like, but just do let me know if there's something that I may have gotten wrong. We're all human, we're not perfect, and I'll be sure to follow up and research on that in upcoming videos. So thank you. Bye.